people tend to want to at least have a perceived liquidity, but a perceived liquidity actually turns into a disappointment quite fast if it doesn't work. So that's why we haven't been rushing with it also. Wherever it's needed in that sense, wherever we can improve pro operations, but we didn't have it this way that, hey, if we pause this, we can do that. It was more like, okay, let's use that money for overall operation as well now that we're not breaching, and then say where it goes. Well, I've learned in my career that until the money's on the account, then the money is not on the account. So in that sense, I wouldn't dare to give any promises or any odds. People who like friends of mine who logged into income and invested, they said that they couldn't have done it without me. So obviously that means that the product is not as US user friendly as it should be for new users, right? If you would have such a button, I would definitely say there needs to be a precise list of loans that you see and you see their performance. It can't go into a black box pool, because how would you then know what's the performance of those loans? How is it a good loan originators? Do they buy back? If how would it work?
Welcome back to episode number 11 of the Income Insights podcast. I'm your host, Denny and alongside me, once again, Income founder and shareholder, Kimmo Rittkön. Kimmo, good to see you again. Today, obviously, we're hosting already the second Q&A session since we started this podcast. So plenty of questions that have been submitted from the community. Curious to hear your answers. Maybe to start off, a personal question, since you mentioned it in the previous episode. How's your physical condition? How's your back pain? Any relief in the meantime, or what's the progress?
Sure. Hi, Denny. Nice to be here again and to answer the questions the community has. I guess getting better, right? So as I mentioned, I've had some problems with the back, and I think that comes with age. So I'm not quite there yet, but let's say getting better. Managed to drop a few kilos and doing exercises in the gym, so getting there, but it's a long haul. So we'll see where I get in a certain time.
Just as with income, probably it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. To quote ACDC.
Yeah, this is correct. This is a startup project on my back again. So.
All right, yeah, but we wish you well. And there was also some, wishes and some blessings from the community that have been posted below the video on YouTube. So everyone is hoping you keep up to witness also the evolution of Income Marketplace while you're getting older, in full health, obviously.
For sure.
All right. Let's jump right into the questions. We got plenty of those that have been submitted from the community. Thanks a lot. We tried to go from the most upvoted ones to the less popular ones, so to say. But of course, we try to point out every single questions that has been submitted. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The question with the most upvotes, the question most investors have been concerned was the secondary market. The question was not if a secondary market will come, but when it will come. So what's your take?
Well, I mean, I think we've covered it before as well. So we have expect, we have everything in that sense planned, and we've gone into detail also a little bit what we think how it could work better than perhaps on other platforms, but. The question is really about the liquidity part, right? So to have a function, we're growing nicely. We have about 17 million outstanding at the moment. We see average investments growing quite nicely. Actually, they've almost doubled since we started, or some time ago, started looking into those in detail. So things are working, but I'm still questioning a little bit that what's the functionality, what's the liquidity part. So if we would introduce it, would people actually be buying them? So does it really give that early exit what it's supposed to investors? So that's why we've been pushing it forward. So it is in the development pipeline. It's definitely something we want to do, but I doubt, this year for sure, we're not going to come out with it. Hopefully next year at some point. So not in the near future, but potentially during the first half of next year. Is something that it makes sense we'll see how we end up this year in terms of how much investments and what's the things that we need to focus on.
Can you maybe be a bit more precise in terms of what would you need to see on the platform to acknowledge, look, there's a necessity now for a secondary market? Because talking from, let's say, my own perspective as an investor, I start to see more assets having longer maturities, and this might be a good way to ensure let's say, the initial liquidity with shorter terms we had in the first couple of years. Now, obviously, with Ibanka, with Sandfield Capital, we're seeing like it's more terms with, maturities longer than 2 years. So from an investor perspective, I kind of see the growing need and also demand to implement a secondary market. What would be, from a platform perspective, the trigger to implement it?
Yeah, I think I'd look at it as a total amount of investments in, right? So because that kind of gives an indication of the liquidity. If you have more investors, if you have a higher pool of loans invested in. So if we're today around 17, aiming hopefully around 20 by the end of the year, if everything goes well, then I think that's the number we're kind of looking at. And I do get it. I get the point on the longer than 1 year loans. People tend to want to at least have a perceived liquidity, but a perceived liquidity actually turns into a disappointment quite fast if it doesn't work. So that's why we haven't been rushing with it also. Just to say, hey, there's a secondary market, you can exit if you want, but then if you put your loans, you wouldn't be able, for example. If that would happen, that would be disappointing. So I think it's an overall, I think, once we hit around 20, 25, perhaps that's the right part to start looking into it, because it depends on the total amount of investors and the total pool of assets that are on the platform. So let's say 25-ish is probably starting to be the threshold where we see that it makes sense.
In terms of implementing the functionality itself, how difficult would you assess this process?
It's not very difficult. Like I said, we have it spec'd, right? So we probably won't build it into a separate section of the site. We will just use the same listings. That was the thinking also, that we don't want to potentially offer any discounted exit prices or other which are confusing. So we want to streamline it. So it's relatively simple. It's really a matter of saying, hey, in our development pipeline, let's now prioritize this and then let's get it done. So it'll take about probably a month of coding and work, but not much more.
And did you have already, let's say, to wrap up with the secondary market, did you have some thoughts in terms of how you want to set it up? So can investors select discounts, premiums? Do you just allow transactions on face value? So any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is that it's, when I ventured onto those other platforms that had the discounts, it was very confusing. Like, you would easily buy loans. I didn't, but you might be easily tricked into buying loans with discounts, and you wouldn't really understand, are you actually making money or is it just somebody poaching on new users? So we thought we'll probably, for the simplicity, there will not be a discount function. So in a way, you would put it into the same listings as any other loan, only with the tag, of course, that this loan is from another investor versus the first assignment, which would be from the loan originator, right? Because otherwise, there's no difference. An assignment you can assign to another investor as the same way as the loan originator assigns to another one. So the functionality of the loan is probably not. It doesn't matter who originates it in that sense. And that's why we thought we'll try to simplify it, and that's the plan today. We'll see if after this we'll get a comment storm saying that, hey, there needs to be discounts, or otherwise would I exit? So we'll see. But I mean, at least that's the plan today.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for sharing those insights. Next up, we got a question from Marcus. He was asking if there's an investor loyalty program in the pipeline.
Well, there is. Obviously, I mean, we're looking at, as I mentioned before, we've been increasing the average investments quite nicely now. So thanks for the trust, obviously, to the whole community. And we've had a lot of talk with Steffi on it. What would be the right way of doing it? How to incentivize those who are actually bringing in the bigger tickets. Peerberry did a fantastic job with it way back I think to the extent that they had to close it down, or they wanted to close it down. At least all the referral programs went down there because they had too many investors. I hope we get into that problem, obviously. But yeah, we've been looking at the ways to incentivize investors. So probably in the future, Steph is working on it, trying to come out with ways of what would make sense.
Can you comment specifics in terms of thresholds, the specific bonus that would be applied?
Well, we haven't really gone that deep into it. There's a lot of kind of things that we need to think about in that sense, like what is the right threshold and how to motivate people to keep the funds over a certain threshold. But we haven't yet gotten into it. I would assume something similar to Peerberry if somebody else is familiar with that. Seems to be that the referral programs, loyalty programs, they seem to be relatively standard to the industry, and we can happily see also what works for other platforms, what doesn't work, and then try to do something a little bit better. But the main solution seems to be relatively standard.
What is the likelihood of having a loyalty program next year?
I'll give it 90.
Say again?
90%. 90%.
90%. Okay.
Yeah.
Just as with your promises with new lenders, we will look closely at the developments and make sure you deliver. Yes. All right, but then that's obviously sounds very promising, and also I think maybe a quick topic we had in the past. Maybe I want to chip in a personal question on my own because you spoke about incentivizing investments. Now, recently, what we can witness in the industry is a couple of platforms that push a lot with cashback campaigns recently, trying to search some investments from investors. Now, with income obviously being also on the more thirsty side in terms of new investments, new funds, you've been quite still and quite holding back in terms of promoting any cashback campaigns. What's the reason for it, and is that maybe also something that's gonna change?
Cashbacks, we have not much even talked about it, to be honest. I used them myself on Mintos way back. I saw some pretty outrageous cashbacks also, 5% back for 5-year loans from some companies. I am not very convinced that it fits into the cost or the total cost of funding of many of the loan originators. In that sense, that obviously it's a cost and it increases the funding cost of the loan originators. Usually the cashback comes from them. So perhaps we'll try to rather push the loan originators to keep the prices at or the interest they pay at a high enough level to be attractive, rather than say that let's try to get a quick buck in terms of like a quick inflow of investments by offering a cashback. So I'm not very convinced that we will see those next year, but obviously that's up to Steffi in marketing to see what makes sense and for us. But that's my personal view, that rather have a stable high yield instead of tricking with cashbacks.
I was actually thinking more from the platform side, and I understand your motivation or the perspective where you're coming from with the lenders not pushing additional cashback, but maybe it's a part of a platform marketing budget that you can allocate within, let's say, a certain pool, which is becoming quite popular recently, and just have a certain additional budget where you can say, look, until this pool has been reached, you can just incentivize because ultimately the ambition or the intention is to grow from income side. So
sure.
Clearly there is a certain amount of supply. What you're lacking is a bit the demand from the investor community. Correct. So maybe this could be a way to accelerate the process a bit and grow your portfolio.
Sure. I mean, one thing that we are discussing every now and then is, with the loan originators is that, if because they're looking at their total funding cost, right? And obviously the platform has its own fees for the whole operation. That's where we earn our revenue. So sometimes we do discuss this, that, okay, if you guys can put a little bit more, we'll bring down our fees for a little bit, so in a way, it's not as visible to the investors, perhaps, if we do it this way, that we drop our fees in order for them to be able to offer investors more, because the total ceiling of their total cost of funding is always there anyway. So if they say we want to pay 14% or we want to pay 12%, then it doesn't matter if it needs to be inclusive of our fees, whatever is the total cost of funding. So that's one way, but perhaps there's a way to look at it from, like you said, from that end, that will chip in a little bit in there. But at the moment it seems like we haven't gotten into that discussion in detail yet.
All right, let's jump to the next question from the community. When will it be possible to keep a fixed amount available at all times so that it is automatically transferred to my bank account every month? So clearly someone who is looking for continuous stable income that can be withdrawn. Do you work on a solution like this?
No, we haven't. And I get it. It would be just like that. You set the balance, and then anything exceeding the balance would be transferred to you. We kind of prefer to have it regardless this way, that if you want cash back, cash withdrawn, then you would need to initiate the request. And I think that's again a little bit of a standard. We haven't looked into it. It is actually the first time we hear that somebody's requesting this kind of a feature. So perhaps it's interesting. We haven't heard enough from too many investors about it. So I think it sounds a bit niche request, because logging in and withdrawing is probably not too difficult. And therefore, we haven't discussed it. I don't see it in the pipeline so far.
All right. Let's switch to a bigger topic that was requested a couple of times, which is ClickCash and the recent developments of pausing the bridge payments from income side. We got René, who's asking, now that no more payments are made for ClickCash from Get Income, what will this money be used for? Improving IT or other processes that affect the business? So let's do the quick math. You said you will pause for 4 months. So that's ultimately 20 grand. Do you have any specific ideas where you will allocate those funds?
Yeah, I guess on a bit broader scale, right? So for those who don't know, maybe know the ClickCash situation. So we wanted to, originally when they went into trouble, we wanted to give investors certainty that, okay, cash is coming, right? So kind of a voluntary saying, hey, we'll patch it. They're going through a rough patch. We'll bridge it. That was the original plan. And just to give investors certainty that cash is flowing while they are sorting their stuff. And so far we've covered about 40,000. The outstanding balance was around 180,000, and I think today their balance is around a total of 100, let's say. So around 40% has already been recovered within a relatively short time. And then essentially we now really, we paused it. We said that, ClickCash is looking to source more funding. They said that, when the funding comes, then they will pay direct to the investors. And we thought, okay, that makes a lot of sense from accounting perspective, from any other perspective, that they would actually deal with their own debt. And that's what we're waiting for now, for those guys to come up and say, okay, here's the cash. Now, if it doesn't happen, then we'll assess it again. Probably we'll continue with the payments, but let's see first if they can manage with their own stuff. In terms of where do we use the money, it's not really we don't have an earmarked place for it, right? So 5,000 a month is relatively small amount. So wherever it's needed, in that sense, wherever we can improve operations, but we didn't have it this way that, hey, if we pause this, we can do that. It was more like, okay, let's use that money for overall operation as well, now that we're not breaching, and then say where it goes. But the main driver is obviously for us is that ClickCash would pay themselves. That would be the morally and let's say legally the right way to do it.
Can you give a quick status quo in terms of if there was any progress made in the last couple months? Because I think the bridging would continue in either December or January. So did ClickCash made use of that time?
Yes, they are reporting to us quite consistently in terms of what's going on. They're talking to some bigger VCs at the moment, also trying to put together the whole thing. So the idea would be for them to raise both equity and debt. So essentially and then get us paid as well as part of the round. So there is progress, but obviously we're not there yet. So we'll have to follow up on that and see when we can communicate and what we can communicate. But there is progress, which is good.
One question that was tying a bit into this as well and kind of questioning the motivation. Why did you stop the ClickCash covering? What has it to do with their promise to do some efforts to maybe pay in the future? Last episode, you mentioned it has some accounting reasons, which maybe makes it easier for them to raise money. Maybe you can elaborate on this one, please.
Yeah. I mean, like if you look at just purely accounting, right? So at the moment we're breaching it, so we are accruing a debt towards them, or the other way around, actually. So purely from an accounting perspective, already it would make much more sense if the money came from there and not from us. So yeah, really, that there's no other big thing except two things. Makes sense for them to pay direct, and then obviously all the practicalities of us pitching in, and that's why we decided that at this point let's do a break now, as it looks like they're able to raise.
Also here, maybe quick view into the, how do you say, the glass bubble. Say again?
The topic.
Yeah, no, just quickly, maybe your forecast also here, the likelihood of them able to raise some funds and then also, ultimately resolve the issue on income. Where do you see the chances right now?
Well, I've learned in my career that until the money's on the account, then the money is not on the account. So in that sense, I wouldn't dare to give any promises or any odds. I mean, we've seen good deals even during income time, not related to fundraising, but to other things. Everything, his hands have been shaken, everything's been agreed on, and then that deal just collapses for whatever reason, or the other party withdraws from it. So really, like until the money is on the account, the money is not on the account, and that's what I've seen in my career, and therefore I don't really dare to give you an odd. Otherwise, people will tell me later down the line that, well, you said 50-50, but it didn't happen. You said 51, it was likely to happen, didn't happen. Then I'm gonna get beaten again for giving false hopes or lying or whatever. So we'll keep the people updated when we know more, when there's something substantial that we can say.
All right. Then we had two questions, which I will group together now. The idea was basically if there's intentions to simplify the product on income side. Someone was referring to Bondora Go and Grow. So is there maybe like one-click solutions that you have in mind? If we look at other marketplaces, we see, let's say, for instance, Scattered Strategies, we see Mintos Core Loans, which is just kind of like simplifying the process a bit for investors who might not want to, get into the whole selection phase and picking loans. What are your thoughts in general, and do you work on a solution like this?
We've discussed it a lot with Lavrenti already long time. I mean, I think it's if people who like friends of mine who logged into income and invested, they said that they couldn't have done it without me. So obviously that means that the product is not as US user friendly as it should be for new users, right? So definitely it's something we would like to do. The question there is obviously that when you look at assignments, and that's how the whole legal framework works, is that you get assigned a loan that you decide to put your loans in. So we're not an asset manager. We don't do investments for you. So this is the kind of the line that we're treading here. is that if we would have something like Pandora's Go and Grow, which has grown really nicely. I mean, I think it's quite a impressively successful product. But you're kind of in a black box. You don't know really where you actually invest in. And that comes to that, then that brings me the question is like, would it put us into an asset management category if we allocate it on behalf of the investor? So there's a few legal considerations in addition to the user experience consideration. The user experience obviously be the more just as equally important as legal, but so these are the things we need to solve. Short answer, yes, we would really much like to have a button that you just log in, you click, and you're there, you get invested in loans. But for now, we don't have a good solution for it.
I think ultimately the black box character doesn't have to be there. It's also a bigger part of my conversation with Pandora as well, who, by the way, also don't consider themselves being asset manager, which is why they can't disclose certain information that I believe would help on the side of transparency. But, maybe just to give an understanding about, if by clicking on this button, you will have a certain allocation with those kind of yields, with those kind of maturities. And if possible, you can give a breakdown in terms of roughly where those funds are allocated and how those, let's say, portfolios are performing. I don't see a bigger issue, but obviously I can understand that there's legal constraints that you need to, get hold of in the first place.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it should be a combination of the Go and Grow Easy plus also the transparency of strategies, right? So the way we have it, or many platforms have it, that you have a precise, not roughly where your money went, but it needs to be precisely shown. You said roughly, I'd say precisely. So I mean, if you would have such a button, I would definitely say there needs to be a precise list of loans that you see, and you see their performance. It can't go into a black box pool. Because how would you then know what's the performance of those loans? How is it a good loan originators? Do they buy back? If how would it work? So the sort of a black box is definitely of our scope. We wouldn't probably want to do it from legal perspective, but also not from otherwise. And then comes the question, really, what you drilled into was that if you click a box, and then you actually, the platform allocates into certain loans. Now, those loans being transparently, where did it go? Then the question is that, did we do the investment on behalf of the investor, or did the investor do? So that's the legal part. But I think there's a combination of those two things that can be achieved. And well, this is a good brainstorm already. So we'll have talks with Lavrenti again on that one after the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, there's maybe then ideas because as you discussed, the growing success of Pandora Go and Grow throughout the years, definitely a benchmark product from since they started, I think in 2018, and then maybe also calculate some discount into it and ensure maybe higher liquidity for investors, which then could eliminate secondary market concerns and give you or the originators a better margin for There's a lot to brainstorm about, but yeah, definitely something that appears to be of interest for investors, and obviously the access for new investors will be a lot easier to get going on the platform. All right, we got roughly 10 minutes left, so we got still plenty of questions here. So let's see how many we can still address. The question about the auto invest feature. How long does it usually take until the AI starts to reinvest the money? Someone was commenting that he usually needs to manually invest after 2-3 days of inactivity. Do you see any issues currently with the auto invest, and what's the process in the back end when it gets triggered again to pick some loans?
All I can say is that it shouldn't take 2 to 3 days. That's something obviously that if you find such things that that there is a 2 to 3 that you've activated it and it doesn't invest, then I suggest take screenshots, send to our help, and we'll take a look. It shouldn't take 2 to 3 days. Maybe something's off with the filters, something's off with your choices, or maybe there's just not assets that fit your filters. Shouldn't take that long. We worked on it quite a long time, and I think it's, again, I mean, we've covered it before. It's a product that needs adjustment every now and then, or a feature that needs adjustment as more LOs come, different loan types come. So definitely something that is constantly under work, and we're trying to improve. But if you find mistakes, please send it to us, and then we can improve.
I haven't had any issues for many months now. Now, given that there is a sufficient supply, but what I can imagine, and maybe that's why recently there is a bit more this topic like coming up again, might be related to the selection criteria of the what was the early buyback button, where you have to select both. And so maybe that's something related with this topic. So maybe just looking into it on how to select those buyback options might resolve the issue then. What are the next steps for the web interface? Do you have anything planned?
I think that's on Steffi's desk, looking into just small improvements at this point. It still seems to be a bit on the slow side, and that's something that we're working on now with the IT to see how to add server speed, how to get it more fluently working. It is a bit on the slow side. It's definitely not there yet where we want it to be. Shortly put, constant improvements, nothing radical planned. Let's get the UX up by where it should be.
Yeah, that ties in nicely with a question we had from Mark. He was asking, when will there be more server capacity? At times, also I witnessed that the server seems to be overloaded. So what's the issue, and how quickly can you fix it?
The issue is not just server space. It's essentially the clearing days, what we do twice a week with the investors. The loan originators. This causes a pretty heavy calculation on the background, because it goes through all the ledgers, all the interest calculations before the clearing, so that the LOs know how much they need to pay us, how much we need to pay them. So there are times when it really gets on the heavy side in the ledger, and now we're looking at also how to increase just on those days, for example, or those times. How do we get a stable performance? But there might be these things that cause it during the clearings, that it's especially slow, what we've identified, and we're working on it.
All right. And I think we got time for one more question. And I think it's a good one, because we hinted at it also the last episode, which is the upcoming regulation changes in Indonesia, which will then affect Dana Rupiah and Dana Bijak. Can you go in more detail what's currently happening there?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and something I wanted to address. Definitely, good thing somebody asked it. So Indonesia constantly cracking down on payday lending. I mean, that's the regulator, OJK, local regulator, the bank regulator, and the peer-to-peer platforms, which are the lenders, the non-bank lenders in Indonesia. So you have banks and non-bank lenders, which are peer-to-peer. So Dana Rupiah, Dana Bijak, for example, plenty of others as well. And so they've been cracking down on those, and mostly on interest rates. So APRs are dropping. So I think currently you can do 0.3% a day. From next year you can do 0.2, and then from 26 0.1. So you can see that there's a significant drop on the APRs you can charge the borrowers. How this kind of a thing usually affects, before we go into what the guys are planning, what this usually does to a market, it causes a market shift, right? So you may have companies that can't price anymore their losses in, so they need to either wrap up, or they need to do something else, find a new product, whatever. So definitely every time in any market APRs drop, be prepared that there's some turmoil. In terms of these two specific ones now, it might be also an opportunity, right? So if some people who have or companies that have a good customer acquisition, good existing base, they can survive. New entrants, it must be more difficult, because at start you would have to have more losses, or have to cover more losses, and you can't cover them from pricing. So makes it more difficult to enter the market also as a new player. How we can see from both of these guys, Dana Bishak, Dana Rupia. They are communicating with us. We've asked it as well. They will be changing their products, right? So especially Dana Rupia, who is quite significant size on our platform, they are going into longer term loans. So, and this is natural. This happens in every market. You have payday, then come short installments, then come longer installments, and then suddenly also the loan sums start going up. And it's all about, like, if you can't charge an APR of only of an X, then you earn in euro to euro, you earn from a small principal, you earn less. So you need to pump up the principal. The only way to pump it up is also to extend the installments. So this is something that we're waiting for from Dana Rupia also to come up with. Obviously, once they get the new product going, we need to do our new due diligence on it and so forth. But definitely it's a market shift. Looks like the guys are prepared. They're communicating with us on that. But that's an overview of what happens when a market changes like that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then thanks for also commenting on the situation in Indonesia. Since we're running a bit out of time now, I think we leave it with that. A couple of questions remaining, but hope investors can understand that we couldn't address all of them, but I still think we got the majority covered. Thank you very much for your insights, Kimmo, as always. Best of luck recovering with your back, obviously, but then also good success with income for the end rally this year.
Yeah, cool. We'll address the questions in the next Q&A.